New York City is a place that never stops moving. It is loud, it is fast, and sometimes it can feel completely heartless. On this particular afternoon, the air was thick and heavy. The sun beat down on the concrete sidewalk, creating waves of heat that bounced off the tall buildings. It was the kind of hot that makes you feel tired the moment you step outside. The kind that makes your clothes stick to your skin and your patience disappear. Michael wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and kept walking. He wasn't walking with the usual New York speed, though. He was walking slowly, dragging his feet a little. His shoulders were slumped forward, and his eyes were fixed on the cracks in the pavement rather than the skyscrapers above him. He felt like he was carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones, even though he was empty-handed. The weight wasn't physical. It was the weight of worry, stress, and a deep, gnawing fear that he just wasn't doing enough. He stuck his hand into his pocket to feel the money there. It was a small, crumpled wad of bills. He had counted it 4 times since leaving his small apartment. He knew exactly how much was there. It was $42.30. That was it. That was everything he had left until payday, which was still 3 days away. For most people in the city, $42 might be a nice lunch. For Michael, right now, it was the difference between hope and despair. Today was important. It wasn't a birthday and it wasn't Christmas. It was something that felt even heavier than that. It was his 5th wedding anniversary. 5 years of trying to build a life together, 5 years of rent, grocery bills, and late-night talks about the future. But lately, the future looked a lot scarier than it used to. The car had broken down last week, and the repair bill had wiped out their savings. Then the electricity bill came in higher than expected. It felt like the world was throwing punches, and Michael was just trying to stay on his feet. He knew his wife, Elena, understood. She was the kind of person who didn't care about diamonds or fancy dinners. She always said, as long as we have each other, we have everything. But Michael cared. He was the husband. He wanted to be the provider, the one who took care of things. He hated the look in her eyes lately when she checked the bank account on her phone, the worried little wrinkle that appeared between her eyebrows. He wanted to fix that. He wanted to see her smile again, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. So he had a plan. A simple plan. He was going to buy her roses, not just one flower. He wanted a dozen. A beautiful, bright bouquet of red roses that would light up the tiny kitchen table in their apartment. He wanted to walk through the door and hand them to her, to show her that even when things were tough, she was still his queen. It was a small gesture, but to Michael, it felt like the most important mission of his life. He turned the corner and saw the flower shop. It was a small slice of color in a gray street. The sign above the door was a bit faded, but the buckets of flowers outside were vibrant and alive. There were bright yellow sunflowers, purple tulips, and deep red roses. The smell of the flowers drifted out onto the street, mixing with the smell of car exhaust and hot dog carts. It was a sweet, fresh scent that made Michael take a deep breath. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just looking at the flowers. His heart was beating faster than normal. It was a nervous feeling, like he was about to do something dangerous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the money again. He smoothed out the crumpled $5 bills and looked at them. $42. Okay, he whispered to himself. Just get the roses? Don't look at anything else. He took a deep breath and walked inside. The shop was much cooler than the street. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background, and the floor was covered in green astroturf. It was a little oasis of calm, but to Michael it felt like a minefield. Everywhere he looked, there were prices. He saw arrangements wrapped in expensive paper with big satin ribbons. He saw exotic flowers he didn't even know the names of. They were beautiful, but they were terrifying. There were other people in the shop. A woman in a sharp business suit was on her phone, arguing with someone about a delivery order. A young couple was laughing, looking at Lila and holding hands. They looked so carefree. Michael envied them. He wondered what it felt like to buy flowers without doing mental math, to just grab whatever you wanted without looking at the price tag. He walked over to the buckets of roses. They were in the back, near the counter. The roses were gorgeous. They were a deep, velvety red with petals that looked like soft velvet. Michael gently touched one of the blooms. It felt cool and delicate. He imagined how happy Elena would be to hold them. He imagined putting them in a vase in the center of the table, maybe lighting a candle. For a second, the worry in his chest loosened. Then, he looked for the price. He searched for the small stick with the price tag stuck in the dirt. He found it and squinted. $7 per stem. Michael's stomach dropped. $7? He did the math in his head quickly. 7 times 12. That was $84. He almost laughed out loud, but it was a humorless, dry sound. He had $42. That meant he could only afford 6 stems. A half dozen roses. 6 roses. It wasn't a dozen. It wasn't the grand gesture he imagined. It felt incomplete. It felt like a failure. He stood there, staring at the flowers, feeling the eyes of the other customers on him, even though nobody was looking. He felt small. "Can I help you find something?" The voice made Michael jump. It was the shopkeeper. He was an older man with gray hair and a polite but tired face. He was wiping his hands on a rag. Michael hesitated. He felt the heat rise in his cheeks. He hated this. He hated having to say, "I can only afford the cheap ones." Michael stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm looking for roses. For my anniversary." "Ah, congratulations," the shopkeeper said, smiling a little. "These red ones here are fresh?" "Just came in this morning. Beautiful." "Yes, they are," Michael said. He took a deep breath and forced himself to ask, are these your best price?" The shopkeeper looked at him, then at the money in Michael's hand, which he was still clutching tightly. The man's expression softened. He understood. He saw this every day. People who loved with their whole hearts, but didn't have the money to match. "Well," the shopkeeper said slowly, "I have some over there that are a bit older. They aren't quite as full, but they are cheaper. $5 a stem. $5. That would still only get him 8 roses. Michael looked at the older roses in the corner. They were a little droopy. Some of the petals were turning brown at the edges. They looked sad. They looked like how Michael felt. He couldn't give those to Elena, not today. It would feel like he was giving her his brokenness instead of his love. "Okay," Michael said quietly. "Thanks anyway." He turned to leave, but he stopped. His feet felt like they were glued to the green carpet. He looked back at the beautiful $7 roses. He looked at the money in his hand. He thought about Elena's smile. He thought about the empty refrigerator at home. Just 6, he thought. 6 is better than none. He reached out and began to count out the stems. 1, 2, 3. As he touched the flowers, he felt a lump forming in his throat. He felt so embarrassed. He was a grown man standing in a flower shop, struggling to buy a simple gift. He felt like everyone in the shop knew his secrets. They knew he couldn't pay his bills. They knew he was tired. He took 6 roses and walked to the counter. The shopkeeper wrapped them in plain brown paper, not the fancy, shiny stuff. He tied them with a simple string. $42, the shopkeeper said. Michael counted out the bills. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He handed over every single dollar he had. The shopkeeper took the money and put it in the register. "Do you want a card?" the man asked. Michael shook his head. He didn't have any money left for a card. He didn't have any money left for the subway ride home, either. He would have to walk. It was a long walk, over 40 blocks, but he didn't care. "No, thank you," Michael said. He took the flowers. They were beautiful, even if there were only 6. But as he held them, the sadness didn't go away. The heartbreak wasn't about the roses. It was about the realization that this was his life right now. The constant scraping, the constant budgeting, the feeling of being one step behind. He turned to leave the shop. As he walked toward the glass door, he saw his reflection. A tired man holding a small bouquet. He took a deep breath, preparing to face the heat of the city again. He pushed the door open, and the bell above it jingled. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. The noise of the city rushed back at him, honking horns, sirens, people shouting. But Michael didn't hear it. He was too focused on trying not to cry. He just wanted to go home. He just wanted Elena to like the flowers. He just wanted things to be okay again. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't notice the man standing a few feet away, looking at the flowers in the window. Michael didn't see the quiet figure watching him, seeing the pain on his face. He just clutched his roses and started the long walk home, unaware that his day was about to take a turn he never could have expected. The little bell above the flower shop door chimed again, a soft, metallic sound that barely cut through the noise of the air conditioning and the low hum of conversation. Michael was still standing at the counter, his hand hovering over his now empty pocket, feeling the heavy silence of having no money left. He didn't look up immediately. He just wanted to gather his thoughts, take a deep breath, and walk out with his head held high. Even though his heart was sinking, but the atmosphere in the shop shifted just a little. It wasn't a dramatic change, nothing like the movies. It was just a subtle ripple. The air currents changed as the door opened and closed. A man walked in. He didn't sweep into the room like a celebrity demanding attention. He stepped inside gently, almost cautiously, like he was trying not to bump into anything or disturb anyone. It was Keanu Reeves. If you were just glancing quickly, you might not even recognize him. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or holding a script. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or flashing cameras. He looked, for all the world, like just another guy trying to get through the day. He was dressed in a simple, dark suit that looked like it had seen better days. The jacket was a little loose, hanging off his frame. He wore a scuffed pair of boots, and on his head was a simple black baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He kept his head down as he walked past the buckets of Leyland sunflowers. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. His shoulders were slightly hunched, a posture that said he didn't want to be seen. He was just a ghost in the machine of the city, a quiet figure moving through the background. The shopkeeper, the older man who had just taken Michael's last $42, didn't even blink. He was busy moving on to the next customer, a woman who was loudly complaining about the price of a mixed bouquet. The other shoppers, a group of tourists, taking selfies with the flowers and the young couple laughing at a greeting card, were too wrapped up in their own worlds to notice the movie star standing right next to them. It was ironic, really. Millions of people knew his face, watched his movies, and admired him from afar. But here, in real life, he was invisible. And that was exactly how he seemed to want it. Keanu moved slowly toward the back of the shop, near the refrigerated case where the more expensive arrangements were kept. He stopped in front of a display of white orchids. He didn't touch them. He just stood there, looking at them with a serious, thoughtful expression. He wasn't looking at the price tags. He was looking at the flowers themselves, appreciating the way the petals curled, the stark contrast of the green stems against the white blooms. While he stood there, his gaze drifted. He wasn't staring at anyone, but he was watching the room. It's a habit people develop when they spend a lot of time alone or when they are used to observing the world for their work. He watched the tourists blocking the aisle. He watched the woman on her phone, her voice sharp and annoyed. And then his eyes landed on Michael. Michael was still at the counter. He had just finished paying. He was carefully taking the brown paper-wrapped bundle of 6 roses from the shopkeeper. He looked down at the flowers, his face a mask of mixed emotions. Relief that he had them. Sadness that he couldn't do more. Exhaustion from the week he had endured. Keanu watched him. He watched the way Michael's shoulders dropped, as if the weight of the world had just settled there again. He watched Michael check his pocket one last time, even though he knew it was empty, a nervous habit. He saw the younger man let out a long, shaky breath that he tried to suppress. There was something about Michael that caught Keanu's attention. Maybe it was the quiet desperation. Maybe it was the fact that Michael was dressed in clothes that looked worn, clothes that had been washed and ironed many times but were starting to fray at the cuffs. Maybe it was just the look in his eyes, the look of a man who was trying very hard not to fall apart in public. Keanu knew that look. He knew it well. He had known pain in his own life, deep and lasting pain. He knew what it felt like to lose things you loved, to face the world when your heart was heavy. He wasn't just an actor playing a role. He was a human being who had walked through some very dark valleys. And when you have walked through those valleys, you develop a kind of radar. You can see it in other people. You spot the ones who are struggling, even when they are trying their best to hide it. The shop was loud, filled with the sounds of commerce and city life. But in the space between Keanu and Michael, there was a moment of quiet understanding. Keanu didn't approach him yet. He didn't say anything. He just watched. He was analyzing the situation, trying to read the story without hearing the words. He saw Michael thank the shopkeeper. It was a genuine thank you. Michael was grateful for the 6 roses. He wasn't angry at the world or bitter about the price. He was just thankful he had something to give his wife. That small detail, that gratitude despite the struggle, seemed to resonate with Keanu. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing a fraction beneath the rim of his cap. The young couple near the door laughed again, breaking the moment. The girl playfully hit her boyfriend with a sunflower. It was a happy, carefree sound. Michael flinched slightly at the noise. He adjusted his grip on the roses and turned to leave. He walked past Keanu, heading for the door, his eyes focused on the exit sign. As Michael passed, Keanu took a small step to the side to let him through. It was a polite gesture, giving the other man space. For a split second, their paths crossed. "Excuse me," Michael mumbled, not looking up, not realizing who he was walking past. "No problem," Keanu said softly. His voice was quiet, raspy, and kind. Michael kept walking, pushing the door open and stepping back out into the oppressive heat of the city. The bell chimed again, signaling his departure. Now, Keanu was alone at the back of the shop, looking at the empty space where Michael had been standing. He looked down at the counter. He saw the pile of crumpled bills Michael had left there, the small pile of 1s and 5s that represented everything that man had in the world. The shopkeeper was sweeping them into the register drawer. Keanu looked at his own hands. Then he looked toward the door, watching through the glass as Michael stepped onto the sidewalk. Michael paused outside, checking the flowers, maybe taking a moment to steady himself before the long walk home. He looked small against the backdrop of the busy New York street. A single figure trying to hold on to love in a city that often felt cold and indifferent. A feeling washed over Keanu then. It wasn't pity. Pity is when you look down on someone. This was different. This was empathy. It was a feeling of connection. He saw a fellow traveler who had stumbled on the road. And Keanu, being the man he was, couldn't just stand there and watch it happen. He couldn't just buy his flowers and go back to his life knowing that a simple gesture of kindness had turned into a moment of shame for someone else. He had seen the hesitation when Michael was paying. He had seen the way Michael counted the bills over and over. He knew that Michael had likely walked into that shop, hoping for a dozen roses, and walked out with half that, feeling like he had failed. Keanu knew that the feeling of coming up short when you wanted to give your best. It was a terrible feeling. The shopkeeper, finally done with the complaining woman, turned his attention to the man in the cap. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone polite but brisk. "We have some great specials on the Lila today." Keanu didn't answer immediately. He was still looking out the window. Michael had started walking away, his head down, moving at a slow pace. "Sir?" the shopkeeper asked again. Keanu turned away from the window. The sad, thoughtful expression on his face was replaced by a look of quiet resolve. His jaw set slightly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. It was a simple wallet, old and worn smooth. "No flowers for me right now," Keanu said. His voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it that made the shopkeeper stop and look at him. He tapped his fingers on the glass counter case. "Actually, I have a question. The gentleman who just left, did he get everything he wanted?" The shopkeeper looked confused. He blinked, trying to remember. "The guy in the gray shirt? With the roses?" "Yeah," Keanu said. "Him. I think so," the shopkeeper shrugged. "He bought 6 roses. Paid cash. Seemed like he was in a bit of a rush." Keanu nodded slowly. He looked at the selection of roses remaining in the bucket. The beautiful, full, deep red ones that were $7 a stem. There were plenty left. He looked like he wanted more, Keanu said, almost to himself. The shopkeeper sighed, leaning on the counter. Yeah, well, everyone wants more than they can afford these days, right? Times are tough. He seemed nice enough. He was short on cash, so he took what he could get. A half dozen is still nice. Keanu didn't laugh at the joke. He didn't brush it off. He just looked at the shopkeeper with intense, serious eyes. Behind the shadow of the cap brim, his expression was heartbreaking in its own way. It was the look of a man who refused to accept that good enough had to be the standard. He believed in the extraordinary, in the grand gesture, even in the small moments. He wanted a dozen, Keanu said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He had seen it in Michael's eyes. He wanted to give her a dozen. Maybe next time, the shopkeeper said, turning to organize some receipt paper. Keanu looked back out the window. Michael was getting further away now, disappearing into tea. The heat outside was even more intense than before. It felt like walking into a wall of hot air. Michael stepped onto the sidewalk, the door of the flower shop clicking shut behind him. The noise of the city immediately surrounded him again, car horns blaring, sirens wailing in the distance, the loud chatter of people rushing to their next destination. But Michael felt like he was underwater. Separated from all of it by a thick layer of sadness, he clutched the brown paper package tightly. The 6 roses inside were beautiful, he knew that. But every time he looked at the bundle, all he could think about was what was missing. The 6 empty spaces on the stem where the other roses should have been. He felt a burning sensation in his throat, a mix of shame and frustration. He tried to push the feelings down. He told himself to be grateful. He had a job. He had a wife who loved him. He had enough money for some flowers, but it wasn't enough to silence the voice in his head that said, "You're failing." He started walking. He didn't have enough money for the subway, so he had a long walk ahead of him. He walked past the luxury stores with their perfectly clean windows and mannequins wearing clothes that cost more than his car. He walked past the crowded cafes where people sipped expensive coffees without a care in the world. With every step, his feet felt heavier. The sweat began to drip down his back, making his shirt stick to his skin uncomfortably. He kept his head down, watching his scuffed boots hit the pavement. He just wanted to get home. He wanted to see Elena. He wanted to apologize for the small bouquet, even though he knew she would tell him it didn't matter. Meanwhile, back at the flower shop, the bell above the door chimed again. Keanu stepped out. The bright sunlight hit his face, and he squinted slightly behind his sunglasses. He wasn't wearing the suit jacket anymore. He had taken it off inside and was now just in his dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked less like a movie star and more like a regular guy fighting his own battle with the heat dot in his hand. He held a large, extravagant bouquet of the deep red roses. It was twice the size of Michael's bunch. The paper wrapping was crisp and expensive, tied with a dark velvet ribbon. The contrast between Keanu's simple, tired appearance and the lavishness of the flowers was striking. He paused on the sidewalk for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the light. He looked to the left. He looked to the right. The street was packed with people flowing like a river, but he spotted Michael almost immediately. Michael was a distinct figure. He wasn't moving with the flow of the crowd. He was walking slowly, a step out of rhythm with the city's energy. Keanu took a deep breath. He wasn't doing this for the publicity. There were no cameras around. If a fan walked by right now, they might not even recognize him. He was doing this because of the look he had seen in Michael's eyes. It was a look he remembered seeing in the mirror himself, many years ago. It was the look of someone trying to hold it together while the world was falling apart. He started to walk. He didn't run. He just moved with a steady, quiet purpose. He weaved through the tourists, dodging a woman pushing a stroller and a man talking loudly on his phone. He kept his eyes locked on the gray shirt in the distance. Michael had reached a crosswalk. He stopped and pressed the button, waiting for the light to change. He stared at the "don't walk" red hand, counting the seconds. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, physically and emotionally exhausted. He adjusted the flowers in his grip, trying to protect them from being jostled by the crowd. He felt a presence come up beside him. Someone stopped right at his shoulder. Michael didn't look up. He just wanted the light to turn green so he could disappear into the next block. "Excuse me," a voice said. The voice was deep, soft, and raspy. It was a polite voice, the kind of voice you use when you don't want to bother someone, but you really need to ask a question. Michael ignored it at first. In the city, people talk to themselves or they talk to you to ask for money. He wasn't in the mood for either. He tightened his grip on his small bouquet and waited. "Hey," the voice said, a little closer this time. "Sorry to bother you. You dropped this." Michael frowned. He checked his pockets. His wallet was there. His keys were there. He hadn't dropped anything. He turned his head, ready to say, "No, I didn't." But the words died in his throat. Standing right next to him was the man from the flower shop. The man in the ball cap. The man who had been standing by the orchids, dot up close. Michael recognized him instantly. The jawline, the nose, the intense, dark eyes looking over the rim of the sunglasses. It was Keanu Reeves. The realization hit Michael like a physical blow. His mouth fell open slightly. His brain scrambled to make sense of it. Why was John Wick standing next to him on a random street corner in New York? I didn't drop anything," Michael stammered, his voice cracking. Keanu didn't smile at first. He looked serious. He looked at Michael's small, brown paper-wrapped bundle of 6 roses. Then he looked at the massive, luxurious bouquet in his own hand. "You didn't drop these," Keanu said quietly. He held out the large bouquet toward Michael. "But you left them behind." Michael stared at the roses. They were perfect. Huge, blooming, and vibrant. There were at least 24 of them. They looked like something out of a magazine. "I don't—" "What?" Michael was confused. His heart was hammering in his chest. "Mr. Reeves? I don't understand." "I was in the shop," Keanu said. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He kept his focus entirely on Michael. It was an intense, focused gaze that made Michael feel like he was the only person in the world. "I saw you counting. I saw you leave. You wanted the big ones, right?" Michael felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He felt exposed. This famous stranger had seen his struggle. He had seen the shame of not having enough money. Michael looked down at his cheap shoes. I couldn't afford them," Michael whispered. "This is all I had?" "I know," Keanu said simply. There was no judgment in his voice. No pity, just a statement of fact. Life is heavy sometimes. It gets expensive. It wears you down. He pushed the large bouquet closer to Michael. "Please," Keanu said. "Take them." Michael shook his head instinctively. No, I can't. That's too much. You don't know me. I can't take these from you." "It's not for you," Keanu said. Michael paused. "What?" "It's not for you," Keanu repeated, his voice dropping lower, becoming even softer. "It's for her. The lady waiting at home. It's for the anniversary." The heartbreaking reaction the world would talk about later wasn't tears. It was the look on Keanu's face in that moment. It was a look of profound empathy. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, not from smiling, but from a deep, remembered pain. He looked like a man who would give anything to have a simple anniversary dinner again, or to buy flowers for someone he loved who was no longer here. He looked at Michael with a kind of desperate kindness, as if he was trying to heal a wound in his own past by helping Michael in the present. "I've been there," Keanu said. "I know what it's like to want to give the world but only have a handful of change. Don't let the money win today. Take them." The traffic light changed. The walk signal lit up. The crowd surged forward around them, rushing past the 2 men standing still on the corner. They were a small island of calm in a rushing river of people. Michael looked at the roses. They were magnificent. He imagined walking through his door with these. He imagined Elena's face. She wouldn't see the money he spent. She would see the beauty. She would see that she was loved. "But how can I pay you back?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "Don't," Keanu said firmly. He reached out and gently placed the bouquet into Michael's free hand. "Just be good to her. That's the payment. Love her hard. That's it." Michael took the flowers. They were heavy, smelling sweet and fresh. He held his small bouquet of 6 in one hand and the grand bouquet in the other. The contrast was ridiculous, but it didn't matter anymore. "Thank you," Michael said, tears finally spilling over and rolling down his cheeks. He didn't try to wipe them away. "Thank you so much. This means—" "You have no idea what this means." Keanu nodded. He reached out and squeezed Michael's shoulder. It was a firm, brotherly squeeze. A grounding touch. "Happy anniversary," Keanu said. He didn't wait for Michael to say anything else. He didn't stick around for a selfie or a handshake. He adjusted his cap, shoved his hands back into his pockets, and turned around. He started walking back the way they came, disappearing into the crowd as quickly and quietly as he had appeared. Michael stood there on the corner for a long time. People brushed past him, annoyed that he was blocking the sidewalk, but he didn't move. He looked at the roses in his hand. They were real. He looked down the street where Keanu had gone, but the actor was already gone. Just a ghost in the city again? The shame was gone? The weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He wasn't just a guy with $42 anymore. He was a man with a story to tell and a gift that would change his entire night. He took a deep breath, wiped his face, and turned toward home. Michael stood there on the corner for a long moment, the tears drying sticky on his cheeks in the humid air. The city was moving fast around him, taxis honking, people rushing to catch the bus, music thumping from passing cars, but he felt like he was standing in the middle of a quiet bubble. The man Keanu was gone. He had just vanished. It was strange how someone so famous, someone recognized by millions of people all over the world, could be so invisible when he wanted to be. He didn't want to thank you. He didn't want a scene. He just wanted to help. Michael looked down at his hands. In his left hand, he held the small, brown paper bundle of 6 roses, the ones he had scraped his last dollars together to buy. In his right hand, he held the massive, elegant bouquet wrapped in expensive white paper and tied with a velvet ribbon. They were so different. The small ones represented everything he had, his hard work, his stress, his limit. The big ones represented a kindness he didn't ask for, a grace he didn't think he deserved. He realized he couldn't go home like this. It felt wrong to carry them separately. It felt like he was hiding his effort. He found a small brick ledge near a closed newsstand and set the flowers down for a moment. With careful fingers, he untied the cheap string on his small bunch. He took the 6 roses out of the plain brown wrapper and gently slid them into the big bouquet. They fit perfectly. They nestled in among the lush, expensive blooms, becoming part of something bigger. Now, it wasn't his flowers and Keanu's flowers. It was just a beautiful, massive collection of roses. It was a symbol, really. It was his hard work mixing with the goodness of a stranger. It felt right. He held the combined bouquet up to his nose and inhaled. The scent was overwhelming. It was sweet and spicy and filled his lungs. It smelled like hope. He started walking again. The long 40-block trek home didn't seem so bad anymore. His feet still hurt in his old boots, and the sweat still trickled down his back, but his spirit felt lighter. He walked through the neighborhoods, passing from the busy shopping district into the quieter residential streets. The buildings changed from glass skyscrapers to old brick walk-ups with fire escapes zigzagging up the front. The streets got a bit dirtier, a bit more worn down, but Michael didn't mind. This was his world. As he walked, he thought about what Keanu had said. Asterisk, love her hard. Asterisk, the words echoed in his head. He thought about the past few months. He had been so stressed, so worried about money and bills, that he felt he had forgotten how to just be with Elena. They used to sit on the couch and talk for hours about their dreams. Lately, they sat on the couch and watched TV, both too tired to talk, both silently worrying about the next rent payment. He had let the stress steal his joy. He had let the poverty of his wallet make him poor in spirit, too. Keanu saw that. The stranger saw it. It was a humbling thought. This man, who had lost people he loved and faced his own tragedies, could spot the struggle in Michael's eyes from across a room. He didn't see a guy with no money. He saw a man who was trying to love his wife but was getting beaten down by life. The sun was starting to go down now, casting long orange shadows across the street. The heat was finally breaking, replaced by a warm evening breeze. Michael adjusted his grip on the flowers. His arm was tired, they were heavy, but it was a good kind of tired. It felt like he was holding something precious, not just stems and petals. He reached his street. It was a block of aging apartment buildings. A few kids were playing basketball in the street using a plastic crate for a hoop. They shouted and laughed as Michael passed. He smiled at them. For the first time all day, the smile reached his eyes. He wasn't just the guy with the empty pockets anymore. He was the guy with the roses. He walked into his building. The lobby was dimly lit to save electricity. The paint was peeling near the mailboxes, and the floor was covered in black and white checkered tiles that were yellowing with age. It smelled like boiled cabbage and floor wax. Michael walked to the elevator and pressed the button. He waited. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Silence. The little arrow light didn't turn on. Great, he muttered. The elevator was broken again. He lived on the 4th floor. He looked at the heavy bouquet in his arms. He could have complained. He could have gotten angry. But instead he laughed softly. He shook his head and started climbing the stairs. 1 flight, he could hear a dog barking behind door. 2 flights, his legs were burning a little now. 3 flights, he was breathing harder. The physical effort felt good. It felt like he was climbing out of the hole he had been in all day. He reached the 4th floor and walked down the long, narrow hallway to apartment 4B. He stood outside the door for a moment to catch his breath. He looked at himself in the reflection of the peephole. His hair was messy from the city wind and his shirt was damp with sweat. He looked tired. But looking back at him, he also saw a man who was lucky. He saw a man who had been given a gift that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with humanity. He took the key out of his pocket. His hand shook slightly, just a tremor of nervous energy. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Hello?" he called out. His voice sounded a bit raspy in the quiet hallway. "I'm in the kitchen," Elena called back. Her voice sounded tired, too, a mirror of his own feelings. "Dinner is almost ready. It's just pasta again." Michael closed the door behind him, locking the city and its noise outside. He set the massive bouquet down on the small table in the entryway. The table was usually cluttered with unpaid bills, keys, and loose change, but he cleared a spot in the center. The roses looked incredible there. They were almost too big for the small apartment. They filled the entryway with their presence. The deep red petals glowed against the dull yellow light of the apartment bulb. The smell of them instantly filled the room, fighting against the smell of old cooking and stale air. He took a deep breath. The contrast was stark. The shabby apartment, the humble pasta dinner, and the extravagant movie star roses. It was a collision of 2 worlds. He walked toward the kitchen. He could see Elena standing over the stove, stirring a pot. She was wearing an old, faded t-shirt and leggings. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked beautiful to him. She always did. She turned around as he walked in. She wiped her hands on a towel and gave him a small, weary smile. "Hey," she said softly. "How was your day?" She looked at his hands, expecting to see them empty. She didn't see the flowers yet. They were hidden around the corner in the hallway. "It was interesting," Michael said. He walked over to her. He didn't touch her yet. He just looked at her. "Actually, it was the hardest day I've had in a long time. But it ended better than I could have imagined." Elena tilted her head, sensing a shift in his energy. "You look different," she said. "Did something happen?" Michael nodded. He felt the emotion rising in his chest again, the same lump he had felt on the street corner. But this time it wasn't panic or shame. It was love. Pure, simple love. "I met someone today," Michael said softly, "and I want to tell you about him. But first, I need you to close your eyes." Elena laughed a little, a nervous but curious sound. Why? Did you buy something we can't afford? No, Michael said, smiling. I didn't buy the best part of it. Just close your eyes. She hesitated, then slowly closed them. She stood there in the small kitchen, the steam from the pot rising around her, waiting. Okay, she whispered. They're closed. Stay there, Michael said. Don't move. He turned and walked quickly back to the hallway. He picked up the heavy bouquet. He cradled it in his arms like a baby, being careful not to crush the blooms. He walked back to the kitchen, the flowers rustling softly with every step. He stopped right in front of her. Open them, he whispered. Elena opened her eyes. Her reaction wasn't a scream. She didn't jump up and down. She just froze. Her eyes went wide, then wider. She stared at the roses. There were so many of them. They filled Michael's arms, spilling over, a cloud of velvet red. They were the most beautiful things she had seen in years. They looked like they belonged in a palace, not a tiny kitchen in a walk-up. She looked from the flowers to Michael's face. She saw the tears glistening in his eyes. She saw the smile that wasn't just polite, but real and deep. Michael, she breathed, her voice trembling. How? It's a long story, he said, his voice cracking. A stranger helped me out. He saw me struggling and he stepped in. But the important part isn't the money, Elena. It's that he wanted me to have these. He wanted you to have them. He held them out to her. She reached out with shaking hands and took them. She buried her face in the blooms and inhaled deeply, closing her eyes again. When she pulled back, a single tear rolled down her cheek. They are beautiful, she whispered. But we can't accept this. It's too much. We don't have the money for this kind of luxury. Yes, we can, Michael said gently. He reached out and wiped the tear from her cheek. He didn't want the money back. He told me to love you hard. That was the price. That's all he wanted. Elena looked at him, her heart swelling until it felt like it would burst. She didn't care about the bills anymore. She didn't care about the broken car or the tight budget. She saw her husband, standing in their tiny kitchen, holding a piece of magic. He hadn't given up. He had gone out and fought for this moment, even when he had nothing. Happy anniversary, Michael said. Elena looked down at the F. They sat down at the small, round kitchen table to eat their dinner. It was just pasta, nothing special. But Michael took their 2 chipped plates and arranged them carefully, placing them on either side of the vase where the roses now sat. He even found a half-burned candle stuck in a drawer and lit it. The flame was tiny, barely flickering, but in the dim light of the apartment, it made the roses glow. The red petals looked like velvet against the worn wood of the table. As they ate, the room felt different. Usually, dinner time was quiet, filled with the sounds of chewing and the clinking of forks, with the TV droning in the background to fill the silence. Tonight, the TV was off. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was peaceful. It was the silence of 2 people who didn't need to say anything because they finally understood each other again. Michael told Elena the whole story. He told her about walking into the shop with his heart pounding. He told her about the $42 and the fear of not being enough. He told her about the man in the cap, watching from the corner. When he got to the part where Keanu walked up to him on the street, Elena stopped eating. She put her fork down and just listened. He didn't just give me the flowers, Michael said, his voice soft but intense. He looked at me, Elena, really looked at me. He saw I was hurting. And he didn't make me feel small. He made me feel seen. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. I still can't believe it was him, she whispered. He is such a famous person. Why would he care about us? Why would he care about a stranger on the street? Michael looked at the roses. He thought about Keanu's face, the serious eyes, the sad smile, the way he gave the bouquet without wanting anything in return. I think he knows what pain feels like, Michael said slowly. I read once that he went through a lot of hard things, losing people he loved. Maybe when he saw me, he remembered what it feels like to lose hope. He didn't give me these roses because he has too much money. He gave them to me because he has a big heart. They finished their meal, and for the first time in months, the knot in Michael's stomach was gone. The food tasted better. The cheap wine they had saved for a special occasion tasted sweeter. The stress of the unpaid bills on the counter didn't disappear, but it stopped feeling like a monster waiting to eat them. It was just paperwork, just problems to solve. They could handle it. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the candle had burned out, they got ready for bed. The apartment was dark except for the streetlights coming through the window. Before they turned in, Michael walked over to the vase one last time. He looked at the roses. They were perfect. But he knew that in a few days the petals would start to wilt. They would turn brown and drop off. That's what flowers do. They die, but he realized then that Keanu's gift wasn't really about the flowers. Flowers are temporary. They last a week, maybe two. The gift was the feeling. The gift was the memory of a moment where a stranger stepped out of the crowd and said, "I see you, and you matter." He crawled into bed next to Elena. She was already drifting off, her breathing steady and calm. He listened to the sounds of the city outside, the distant sirens, the hum of traffic, the footsteps of the neighbor upstairs. Usually these sounds kept him awake, reminding him of the endless race he was running. Tonight they sounded like a lullaby. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he fell asleep instantly. The next morning, the sun was shining brightly through the thin curtains. Michael woke up, and for a few seconds he forgot about the previous day. Then he rolled over and saw Elena sleeping. She looked peaceful. He walked out to the kitchen. The roses were still there. They looked even more beautiful in the morning light. His phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up. It was a notification from the bank. He didn't even flinch. He knew the balance was low. He knew he had a long shift at work today. He knew the car was still broken. But the anxiety didn't grip his chest the way it used to. He poured a cup of coffee and stood by the window, looking down at the street. Thousands of people were walking by. Every single one of them had a story. Every single one of them was fighting a battle he knew nothing about. He wondered how many of them were just one bad day away from breaking. He wondered how many of them were counting out crumpled dollars in a shop. Feeling invisible before yesterday, Michael would have looked at them and felt alone in his struggle. Now he looked at them and felt a connection. He felt a strange new courage. Keanu Reeves is out there somewhere, he thought. If he can do that for me, maybe I can do something for someone else. He didn't have millions of dollars. He couldn't buy fancy flowers for strangers, but he could hold a door open. He could smile at someone who looks sad. He could be the person who notices. That was the magic of what happened. It wasn't just about saving an anniversary. It was about a chain reaction. One act of kindness doesn't just fix one moment. It changes how you see the world. It makes you a little softer, a little kinder, a little more human. Michael got dressed for work. He put on his boots and the gray shirt he had worn the day before. He grabbed his coat. Before he left the apartment, he went to the table. He gently touched one of the soft red petals. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty room. He wasn't just talking to the actor. He was thanking the universe for sending a reminder that goodness exists, even in the hardest times. He walked out of the building and onto the sidewalk. The city noise hit him again, the horns, the shouting, the rush. But today, Michael didn't shrink away from it. He walked with his head up. He walked with a little bit of a swagger. He had a beautiful wife at home, a vase full of roses, and a story he would tell for the rest of his life. And somewhere in that vast concrete jungle, a man in a ball cap was probably walking quietly too. Invisible to the crowd, but carrying a light that guided others out of the dark. Michael smiled, took a deep breath of the morning air, and started his day. The world hadn't changed, but he had. And that was enough.